What would you do if the person you loved most betrayed you in the most unforgivable way? Betrayal, such a simple word, yet one that carries with it unimaginable depths of hurt and rage. When the ones you trust the most shatter your heart, what happens next? Tonight, we explore a true crime story that's not just about love, it's about a heartbreak so deep, it spirals into a night of unthinkable tragedy. This is the story of Priya and Sandeep, a couple who had everything, yet watched their perfect life crumble when love turned into betrayal and, ultimately, a deadly consequence. Prepare yourself for the emotional journey of a lifetime, one that will make you question how far a heart, broken by betrayal, can truly go. This is Crimes of Passion. Husband catches wife and best friend in bed, ends in murder. Watch this video all the way through to truly grasp the shocking twists and profound emotional depth. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Sandeep's place? And don't forget to subscribe to Crimes of Passion for more gripping true crime stories. In the heart of Mumbai, 1984, a girl was born with a dream that many could only hope to realize. Priya K. Carney. Raised in a middle-class family that valued education and discipline, Priya grew up with a passion for medicine. As a child, she would often daydream about donning the white coat of a doctor, helping the sick, and making a real difference in the world. Her love for nursing led her to Mumbai Medical College, where she studied tirelessly, graduating with honors. Priya wasn't just a good student, she was exceptional. Driven by an unshakable sense of duty, she quickly became a trusted member of the medical community. Her kindness, her gentle touch, and her unwavering commitment to her patients made her a beloved figure in the hospital. But it wasn't just her colleagues who admired her. Priya had a natural ability to connect with everyone she met. By the time she was 30, Priya had already earned a significant reputation. She had risen to become the head nurse at one of Ahmedabad's most prestigious hospitals. It wasn't just her qualifications that made her a leader, it was her compassion and meticulous attention to detail. She was the kind of person who believed that every life mattered and that every patient deserved her best. But life, as it often does, has a way of leading us down paths we never expect. The day Priya met Sandeep was one of those moments, an intersection of two very different worlds that, in time, would change both of their lives forever. It was November 2012 when Priya's life would take a turn. She met Sandeep Joshi, a military officer, at a hospital event, a blood donation camp. Sandeep was invited as the guest of honor, there to give a motivational speech to the volunteers. His presence was commanding. His military uniform stood out in the room, and his posture exuded strength, yet there was something in his eyes, something more than the hardened exterior of a soldier. Priya, with her quiet grace, stood at the back, observing the proceedings. Their first interaction wasn't anything extraordinary. Priya, as always, was calm, professional, and kind. Sandeep, ever the disciplined officer, maintained his usual poise. It was a simple exchange, a nurse taking the blood pressure of a guest. But there was something in the air between them, an unspoken connection that neither of them could ignore. It was a moment that didn't carry the intensity of a romantic encounter, but still, it lingered. Both Priya and Sandeep felt it, something beyond the formality of the event, something that told them their paths were meant to cross again. They went their separate ways that day, but neither could quite shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning. Not long after, fate had another twist in store for them. Through a hospital-military collaboration, Priya and Sandeep were brought together again. This time, it wasn't a fleeting moment. They worked together on a joint program to train soldiers in first aid. What began as a professional exchange gradually became more. Through shared work, they started to really talk. Sandeep shared stories of his time in the military, of harsh conditions at the borders, of battles fought and won. Priya shared her experiences from the hospital, of the quiet victories, of saving lives, and of the fulfillment she found in her work. It wasn't long before their conversations shifted from casual work talk to something more personal. They began to find comfort in each other. Sandeep, though a soldier with a tough exterior, found solace in Priya's warmth and compassion. Priya, in turn, found in Sandeep's calm determination a strength she hadn't expected. They spent long hours together, talking about their worlds, two people, so different, yet so alike. Priya admired Sandeep's resilience, his ability to endure hardship, while he found a quiet strength in her, something that went beyond her gentleness. He saw in her a resolve he hadn't expected. And slowly, through these moments, their bond grew. As their relationship began to develop, it wasn't a whirlwind romance. It wasn't about grand gestures or fiery confessions. It was about understanding, about being there for each other in quiet moments. Priya's calm and caring nature balanced Sandeep's often rigid and controlled demeanor. They didn't need to speak loudly to understand one another, they simply were together. Their connection deepened, not through the excitement of infatuation, but through the simple, honest act of being present for one another. Priya's gentle words softened the edges of Sandeep's hardened exterior. And in turn, Sandeep's strength gave Priya a sense of security, something she had never experienced before. There was no rush, no urgency. They were content with the slow building rhythm of their connection. They didn't need to say anything, not yet. But deep down, they both knew that something had shifted. Something was beginning to form, something far more significant than either had anticipated. After months of building trust, sharing laughter, and quietly learning about one another's worlds, Sandeep knew that it was time. Time to ask the question that would forever bind their lives together. Priya had become his quiet anchor, the warmth in his heart after long, cold nights of duty. And now, he was ready to take the next step into a future with her by his side. On the banks of the Sabarmati River, as the evening sky darkened and the city lights began to sparkle, Sandeep and Priya stood together in the quiet beauty of the moment. It wasn't a grand gesture, nor a show of opulence. Sandeep wasn't a man of extravagant words or flashy displays. His love for Priya was simple but profound. He didn't need diamonds or extravagant promises, just a quiet assurance that they would face whatever came next, together. With a steady hand and a heart full of sincerity, Sandeep offered her the silver ring, a symbol of stability, of a future grounded in trust and respect. It wasn't about what the ring looked like, but what it meant. A promise. A promise to stand by each other, no matter what. Priya, in that moment, felt everything she had ever wanted fall into place. She had always dreamed of a love that was steady and unwavering, and now, standing there with Sandeep, she felt that promise echo in her heart. There were no grand speeches, no sweeping declarations, just the quiet sincerity of a man who loved her deeply. And in her heart, she knew that this love would last. There, in the quiet moments by the river, Priya and Sandeep made their unspoken vows to each other, not just in words, but in the way they held each other, in the way they quietly shared their lives. The simplicity of their love was what made it so special. No frills, no theatrics, just two people, deeply connected, ready to begin their life together. And so, after months of anticipation and the quiet promise made by the river, Priya and Sandeep's journey together truly began. The day of their wedding arrived, a celebration of love, unity, and the blending of two worlds. A world of medicine and a world of military discipline. Two different backgrounds, but one shared future. For Priya, This day was everything she had dreamed of. It wasn't about the extravagance, it wasn't about the thousands of guests or the luxurious decorations. It was about marrying the man she loved, the man who had quietly understood her, supported her, and made her feel seen. She wore a beautiful red silk sari with gold borders, a symbol of both her cultural heritage and the new chapter she was about to begin. And for Sandeep, this was more than just a wedding, it was a union of two souls, two lives that had once seemed so different. In his military uniform, Sandeep stood tall, proud, but in that moment, there was something more in his eyes. The pride he felt for Priya, the pride in knowing that this woman, his quiet strength, was now his partner in life. As they walked around the sacred fire, the vows they spoke echoed in the air. Each step they took was a step toward their shared future. Each promise was a binding one. Priya promised to stand by Sandeep, to support him in the quiet moments and in the chaos of life. Sandeep promised to care for her, to love her with patience and honor. The wedding was not extravagant, but it was filled with sincerity and love. Friends, colleagues, and family from both the military and medical fields came together, united in their support for Priya and Sandeep. The medical world and military world, so different in so many ways, came together to celebrate the love between two people who had found a common ground in each other. As the evening came to a close, Priya and Sandeep sat together on the balcony, looking out over the city. The hustle and bustle of the day had passed, and now it was just the two of them, sharing a quiet moment of peace. They didn't need to say much. The promises they had made earlier in the day were enough. The vows were said, but it was the quiet moments, the simple acts of love, that meant the most. And as they sat there, side by side, they both knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey ahead, a journey filled with challenges, but also love, patience, and understanding. In the beginning, Priya and Sandeep's marriage was everything she had dreamed of. Their love was solid, unwavering. They shared quiet evenings after long days of work, small moments of laughter, and conversations that made her feel understood and cherished. There was warmth in every glance, every touch. But as time passed, the reality of Sandeep's career began to seep in. Sandeep's role in the military came with long stretches of absence, deployments, rigorous training schedules, and the constant weight of responsibility. Priya, ever the understanding wife, knew this was part of who he was. She had known from the start that his career would demand his time and attention. Still, she hadn't anticipated the emotional toll that distance would take on her. At first, the separation was bearable. Priya kept herself busy with work, finding comfort in her patience and the steady rhythm of her days. But slowly, she began to feel a quiet emptiness, a hollow space that grew with each passing day that Sandeep was away. His calls became less frequent. His visits home became shorter, and when he was present, he was often distracted, his mind always on his next assignment. Priya found herself longing for the small things, the shared dinners, the quiet moments together at the end of the day, the warmth of his presence. Those simple pleasures began to slip away, replaced by silence. She tried to hold on to what they had, to keep the flame alive, but it wasn't enough. She felt the gap between them widening, not just in the physical distance but in the emotional distance as well. What had once been an easy connection, a bond filled with shared laughter and understanding, was now replaced by a growing coldness. In the midst of her growing loneliness, Rajiv Verma began visiting more often. Rajiv, Sandeep's childhood friend and fitness trainer, had always been a familiar face to Priya. At first, his visits were innocent enough. He helped her with tasks around the house when Sandeep was away. He would bring her groceries, chat about old times, and fill the silence that had begun to engulf her life. Rajiv's presence, at first, was a welcome distraction. He was there when Priya needed help, when the weight of loneliness felt unbearable. He offered companionship without expecting anything in return, and for a while, it was just that innocent and familiar. Priya found herself enjoying his company more and more. What started as a few visits here and there turned into regular check-ins, long conversations over coffee, and the easy comfort of a friend who understood her when she needed it most. But as time went on, something began to shift. Rajiv's visits became more frequent. Their conversations, once light and carefree, started to delve into deeper, more personal topics. Priya began to confide in him about the strain in her marriage, about how she missed Sandeep's touch, how the emotional distance was becoming too much for her to bear. Rajiv listened, offering sympathy and understanding. And in doing so, he began to fill the space Sandeep had left behind. What started as simple companionship began to change. Rajiv's presence, which had once been comforting, now became a crutch that Priya leaned on more than she had ever expected. His gestures, his kindness, the way he paid attention to her in ways Sandeep had stopped doing, these things began to stir emotions Priya hadn't realized were there. She had never planned for it. She hadn't set out to replace Sandeep, but in the growing emptiness of her life, Rajiv's attention became a lifeline she couldn't resist. There was no grand moment of realization. There was no sudden spark or overwhelming rush of emotions. But little by little, the line between friendship and something more began to blur. Rajiv's presence, once a simple remedy to her loneliness, became a source of comfort in a way that she hadn't expected. And slowly, Priya found herself drawn to him in ways that went beyond friendship. But despite the growing bond between them, Priya couldn't ignore the nagging guilt in her heart. She had always believed in loyalty, in the sanctity of her marriage. She had never expected to find herself in this situation. Rajiv had been Sandeep's best friend, a man Priya had trusted. Yet here they were, in an unspoken understanding that hovered between them, something more than friendship, but not yet fully defined. Priya tried to keep the boundaries clear, but the emotional connection had deepened in ways she couldn't control. Rajiv's presence had become too familiar, too comforting. And in her heart, she couldn't help but question the growing feelings that she had never intended to develop. What had started as a way to fill the void Sandeep left behind had now become something more dangerous. The quiet moments they shared, the gentle laughter, the lingering glances, they began to shift into something else. Something Priya had never planned for but couldn't seem to stop. The loneliness she had felt for so long now had a name, Rajiv. And for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. But what would it cost her? What would it mean for her marriage and for her heart? As the distance between Priya and Sandeep grew, so did the closeness between her and Rajiv. But deep down, Priya knew that something wasn't right. She couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed, that the emptiness she had felt for so long could simply be filled by someone else. The strain on her marriage was undeniable. And while she never intended for things to go this far, the emotional connection she had found in Rajiv had become a temptation that was impossible to ignore. The question now was simple: how long could she live in this silence, torn between the life she had once shared with Sandeep and the growing bond she shared with Rajiv? It wasn't supposed to happen like this. What began as an innocent friendship, an effort to fill the gaps in Priya's lonely days, had slowly transformed into something deeper. Rajiv understood Priya's heart in ways that Sandeep, despite his love, could not. He was there when she needed someone to talk to, when the silence of her home felt suffocating, when she longed for the affection that had once been so freely given. Rajiv didn't just listen to her words, he felt them. His attention, his empathy, filled the emotional void in Priya's life. She began to lean on him more and more, seeking not just a friend but someone who could understand the loneliness she had quietly endured for so long. Their conversations, once light and casual, began to shift. They talked about things that were more intimate, more personal. Priya confided in Rajiv about the cracks she saw in her marriage, about the distance between her and Sandeep, and about the loneliness that had been creeping into her heart. Rajiv, always kind and patient, offered comfort, and with each passing day, their emotional connection deepened. And then, one evening, everything changed. What had started as emotional support, as simple companionship, blurred into something else. Rajiv's presence, once a source of comfort, had become something more, a temptation Priya didn't know she could resist. The evening had started like any other. Rajiv had stopped by to check in on her after a long day, just as he always did. But this time, something felt different. There was an unspoken tension between them, a crackling energy that neither of them had acknowledged before. Priya, vulnerable and exhausted from the weight of her own emotions, felt something stir within her. Rajiv, noticing her unease, reached out to comfort her. In that moment, the boundaries between right and wrong began to fade. The emotional connection they had built over the past months turned into something physical, something that Priya hadn't intended but couldn't stop. The kiss came gently at first, hesitant, but soon it deepened, filled with all the emotions Priya had buried for so long: desire, loneliness, and a need for connection. And just like that, what began as a moment of comfort between two old friends became something much more dangerous: a betrayal. The weight of it didn't hit Priya immediately, but as their bodies met, she knew, deep down, that this moment would change everything. In the aftermath, Priya found herself alone with her thoughts. Guilt consumed her, but so did desire. She knew what she had done was wrong. She had betrayed Sandeep, the man she had promised to love and honor. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the connection she had with Rajiv, the emotions he had stirred in her that Sandeep hadn't been able to provide for so long. Priya wrestled with herself, torn between the love she had for Sandeep and the pull she felt toward Rajiv. She justified her actions in her mind. Sandeep wasn't here, Rajiv was, and for the first time in a long while, Priya felt seen. She tried to push away the guilt, but it lingered in the back of her mind. It wasn't supposed to happen. Priya never imagined herself in this position. She had always believed in loyalty, in the sanctity of her marriage. But the loneliness, the absence of Sandeep, had worn her down. And in Rajiv, she had found something she had been missing: attention, affection, and an understanding of her deepest fears. She didn't want to hurt Sandeep, but the heart, once bruised by distance and neglect, had found solace in a place it shouldn't have. The more Priya tried to fight it, the more she found herself drawn to Rajiv, unable to ignore the connection they now shared. But as the days passed, the reality of what Priya had done began to set in. She tried to return to normal, to resume her life with Sandeep, but every glance, every word felt like a lie. Her mind was consumed by the memory of Rajiv, by the undeniable connection she had with him. The guilt gnawed at her, but so did the longing. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she couldn't bring herself to end it either. She told herself it was a mistake, that it had been born out of loneliness, but deep down, Priya knew that it was something much more. It was betrayal, not just of Sandeep, but of the promises she had made to herself. The more Priya tried to justify it, the deeper she sunk into the lie. And as she sent that message, asking Rajiv to meet again, she knew that she was choosing a path that would only lead to more heartache. The affair, born out of desire and loneliness, was now something more, something dangerous that would ultimately unravel everything she had built with Sandeep. It had been months since Sandeep had returned home. After months of harsh conditions at the Kashmir border, he was finally home, eager for the warmth and familiarity of his wife, Priya. He'd braved the cold winds, the rugged terrain, and the pressures of his military duties, but all of that faded the moment he pulled into his driveway. All he wanted now was to be with Priya. To feel her warmth, to return to the life they had built together. But as soon as he stepped inside, something felt off. The house, which once echoed with laughter and the soft murmur of shared conversations, now felt cold, distant. Priya wasn't there to greet him with her usual smile. No laughter, no warm embrace. Only a cold emptiness. He found her sitting on the couch, but her eyes didn't meet his. She smiled, but it was forced, distant. The warmth in her gaze had faded, and Sandeep, ever the observant man, noticed the subtle signs of change. She avoided his gaze. Her phone, usually resting on the table nearby, was now tucked out of sight. The small things that used to be so familiar, the easy conversations, the quiet moments of connection, seemed to have evaporated. Priya was not the woman he had married. Something was different. Sandeep, a man of discipline and instinct, trusted his gut. He had spent years in the army, learning to read situations, to spot the smallest of details. His mind began to race. Priya's behavior, her avoidance, the hidden phone, the forced smile was too much to ignore. He could feel it. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional. But what could it mean? He pushed the thought aside. Priya had always been supportive, loving, but the changes were too drastic to overlook. Something had shifted, and Sandeep couldn't help but wonder if the distance between them was caused by something more. That night, Sandeep could no longer ignore the gnawing feeling in his chest. He had to know. He needed to see what Priya was hiding. And so, when Priya left the room to tend to something in the kitchen, Sandeep reached for her phone. His hands shook slightly, his mind racing with the thoughts he had been pushing away. What was he about to uncover? What Sandeep found on that screen shattered him. Messages, affectionate, intimate words between Priya and Rajiv lay before him. There was no mistaking it. The language, the tone, the promises made between them were all too real. Priya, his wife, the woman he had trusted completely, had betrayed him. He sat there in stunned silence, his heart breaking with every word he read. It wasn't just a simple mistake. It was an affair, an emotional and physical betrayal that cut deeper than any wound he had ever faced. The woman he had loved, the woman he had promised to protect and cherish, had shared her most intimate moments with his best friend. Betrayed by the two people he loved most. His best friend, Rajiv, a man he had trusted like a brother, had crossed a line that could never be undone. And Priya, his wife, had not only betrayed his trust but had allowed that betrayal to flourish under his very roof. In that moment, everything Sandeep had known, everything he had fought for, everything he had built began to unravel. The loyalty, the love, the life they had shared was shattered in an instant. Sandeep's mind began to race. His heart, broken and furious, wanted nothing more than to confront Priya and Rajiv immediately. But Sandeep, ever the soldier, knew that this moment would require more than just an outburst. His instincts told him to plan, to wait. He needed to know more. He needed to make sure he wasn't imagining things, that this betrayal wasn't a misunderstanding. On December 19th, Sandeep pretended to leave the house for an urgent meeting, but this was no ordinary meeting. He wasn't going to work, he was going to wait. He would hide in the shadows, waiting for the inevitable. He knew Rajiv would come. He had to be certain. He had to see it for himself. He wasn't sure what he would do once he had confirmation, but his mind was already made up. The pain of betrayal was too much to bear. His heart, shattered into 1,000 pieces, was driving him toward a decision he couldn't undo. The man who had once been a soldier, calm and composed, was now a man on the edge, his emotions clouding his judgment. As the minutes dragged on, Sandeep's heart pounded in his chest. He waited, every second stretching into eternity. And then, just as he had feared, Rajiv arrived. He walked confidently up to the door, the spare key in hand, and entered the house. The betrayal he had feared had come to life. The man who had once been his brother, his friend, was now standing in his home, about to cross a line that could never be undone. And in that moment, Sandeep knew. There would be no turning back. The night had come. The night that would change everything. Sandeep had spent hours waiting, silently watching, his heart pounding in his chest. The world outside seemed distant, far removed from the storm brewing in his mind. His patience had been tested for so long, months of uncertainty, of pain, of betrayal. Now, there was no more waiting, no more doubt. He knew what he had to do. The house that once felt like a home now felt like a battleground, quiet, oppressive, the air thick with anticipation. Sandeep wasn't sure how he had arrived at this point, but in that moment, it didn't matter. His mind was made up. It wasn't just the betrayal. It wasn't just the anger. It was the overwhelming sense of loss, the loss of everything he had ever believed in. Priya, the woman he had promised to love and protect, and Rajiv, the man he had called his friend. They had destroyed him, piece by piece, and now, he was left with nothing but the echo of his broken trust. As Sandeep waited in the shadows, his breath slow and controlled, the doorbell rang. Rajiv was here. Rajiv, completely unaware of what had been set in motion, stepped into the house with the same nonchalance he had shown so many times before. He walked in as if nothing had changed, as if his friendship with Sandeep had not been shattered by the very woman they both loved. His footsteps were light, but each one felt like a death knell for the future that could have been. Sandeep remained still, hidden in the darkness, his heart now a mixture of fury and sorrow. He could hear Rajiv's voice, muffled in the distance, calling out to Priya. It felt like an eternity as Sandeep waited, his pulse thundering in his ears. Priya? You hear? Each word Rajiv spoke cut deeper into Sandeep's soul. The casual nature of his voice, the ease with which he walked into a home that was no longer his, drove the knife deeper. Every step he took was a reminder of what Sandeep had lost, a stark contrast to the man who had once been his closest friend. There, in the darkened hallway, Sandeep finally moved. With slow, deliberate steps, he approached the bedroom where Rajiv and Priya's betrayal had taken place. He could hear them now, the soft murmur of voices, the sound of clothes rustling, the faint scent of perfume hanging in the air. And then, the silence. As the door creaked open, Rajiv's face, caught in shock, looked up just in time to see the weapon in Sandeep's hand. For a split second, everything stopped. Time seemed to stand still as Rajiv's eyes met Sandeep's. He didn't have time to react. His life, which had once been so full of promise, was extinguished in an instant. Sandeep's finger pulled the trigger, and the sharp sound of gunfire broke the heavy silence. The bullet hit Rajiv square in the chest. His body crumpled to the floor, lifeless, before hitting the carpet with a sickening thud. Just like that. In a single moment, Sandeep's world was shattered beyond repair. Rajiv, the man he had trusted, the man who had stolen everything from him, was gone. And in the same instant, the betrayal that had been festering in Sandeep's heart exploded into an irreversible action. Priya's scream echoed through the room, the sound of her shock and regret rising into the air. She had fallen to the floor, her knees buckling beneath her as she struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Her heart was racing, her breaths shallow. She looked up at Sandeep, who stood motionless, the gun still raised, his eyes cold and unfeeling. In that moment, Priya understood everything they had built, everything they had shared, was now destroyed. And it was because of her. Because of the betrayal she had allowed to take root in her heart. There were no words. No explanations. No apologies. Just the cold silence that filled the room as Priya's gaze met Sandeep's. Her own regret, her own guilt, reflected in her eyes as she realized the depth of the destruction she had caused. Sandeep's anger had not yet been quenched. In a fit of heartbreak and vengeance, he raised the gun again. With no hesitation, he fired once more. The second shot tore through her, and Priya, the woman he had promised to love and protect, fell to the ground, her life slipping away in the same room where it had all begun. 2 lives, shattered in the blink of an eye. Was this revenge? Was this the result of years of betrayal and emotional torment? Or was it the devastating consequence of a broken man finally cracking under the weight of his grief and rage? Sandeep didn't know. All he knew was that everything he had loved, everything he had worked for was gone. His wife, his best friend, his trust, his love, all destroyed in a single, tragic night. And so, in the silence that followed, Sandeep surrendered. Not just to the law, but to the consequences of his own actions. His life, his love, his trust destroyed in one terrible night. And now, all he had left was the echo of what could have been. When the police arrived, the scene they walked into was one of absolute devastation. The once warm and loving home that Priya and Sandeep had shared was now a crime scene, a space tainted by blood and betrayal. The officers moved cautiously through the house, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The heavy scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air, mingling with the unmistakable scent of blood. They reached the bedroom, once a place of comfort, now a graveyard of shattered lives. Rajiv and Priya lay there, the victims of a betrayal so deep that it could only be answered by violence. The blood that stained the carpet was a symbol of the trust that had been broken, of lives that had been destroyed in the blink of an eye. But it wasn't just the physical devastation that struck the officers as they stood over the bodies. It was the quiet man sitting in the living room, waiting for them to arrive. Sandeep, the man who had once been a soldier, who had fought battles on the front lines, now sat motionless on the couch, his hands clasped together in a silent surrender. There were no words of defense, no attempt to escape, no remorse or explanation. Just the calm acceptance of what he had done. Sandeep had already surrendered himself to the consequences of his actions. The man who had once been strong, resilient, and disciplined now sat defeated, broken by his own choices. His soul, torn apart by betrayal, was now locked in the same chains that bound his wrists. The trial began in the spring of 2015. It was a case that shook the community, a case of love, betrayal, and a life shattered. The prosecution argued that Sandeep had carefully planned the murders of his wife and best friend. They painted him as a man who had allowed his anger and betrayal to drive him to cold, calculated violence. The defense, however, told a different story. They argued that Sandeep had been mentally disturbed, emotionally broken by the betrayal of the two people he had loved and trusted most. He was not in control of his actions, they claimed, driven to madness by the discovery of the affair. The defense presented psychological reports, detailing the toll that months of isolation, military duty, and the emotional strain of betrayal had taken on Sandeep's mind. For Sandeep, the trial was just another reminder of the devastation he had caused. His emotional state was laid bare in front of everyone: his heartache, his confusion, and his overwhelming sense of loss. But the court was not there to judge his heartache. The question was not whether he was sorry, the question was whether he had planned this act of violence. And as the trial went on, it became clear that this was no spur-of-the-moment decision. The prosecution maintained that Sandeep had meticulously calculated every step of that tragic night. He had waited for Rajiv, he had planned the confrontation, and he had executed the violence with a clear and deliberate intent. The jury deliberated for days. They weighed the evidence, listened to the testimony, and considered the emotional toll of Sandeep's actions. Was this the act of a man who had been pushed to the edge, or was it the cold-blooded act of a man who had been consumed by his own rage and betrayal? In June 2015, the verdict was read. Sandeep Joshi was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the first-degree murder of Priya and Rajiv. The courtroom was filled with the weight of the decision. Justice had been served, but there was no victory here. There was only loss. 25 years. A long sentence, but in Sandeep's heart, the true sentence was already served. The prison bars would keep him physically confined, but the emotional torment, the loss of the love he had cherished, would stay with him for the rest of his life. The true sentence, Sandeep would later realize, was not the 25 years behind bars. The real sentence was the one in his heart, a heart forever broken by betrayal, by loss, and by the consequences of his own actions. There would be no escape from the memory of that night, the moment when his world had shattered, and two lives had been lost in a single, irreversible act. He would carry the weight of that betrayal with him every day of his life. Sandeep had once been a soldier, trained to face the harshest of conditions. But no amount of training could have prepared him for the devastation that came from within, the destruction of everything he had ever believed in, everything he had ever loved. The trial, the verdict, the years in prison, they were all just a formality. In his soul, the real punishment had already begun. It was a punishment that would last a lifetime, a life haunted by the faces of those he had loved and lost. What drives a person to commit such an act? Betrayal, as we've seen tonight, is a powerful emotion, one that can break even the strongest individuals. Priya, Sandeep, and Rajiv, all their lives were forever changed by a single moment of betrayal. In the end, no one wins. Not Priya, not Sandeep, and certainly not Rajiv. The tragic consequences of their choices echo through their lives and the lives of those around them. Their once hopeful futures now lay shattered, forever haunted by what could have been. So, we are left to ask, was the ultimate cost worth it? Could this tragedy have been avoided? What would you have done if you were in Sandeep's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button to join the Crimes of Passion community for more chilling stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and remember, every story has a lesson. It's up to us to learn from it.